Hi, my name's Jerry. I work for Newmarket and District Youth for Christ, and we're doing your assembly this week. The theme is Harvest. It's great to see you, albeit in a very, very different situation. I hope you're getting to grips with everything that's new. I know we're having to learn new things, as this video will show. And we're thinking about it at this time of year in the Christian calendar. Now, the word harvest, Jesus, the founder of the Christian faith, would have been very, very familiar. He would have seen very different things than we see today, sowing seeds by hand and obviously harvesting by hand as well. But he would have been aware of harvest, but not in the context that we know it in our churches and faith, the Christian faith today. He was a Jew, he wasn't a Christian, and in the Jewish faith he would have been aware of a festival called Shavuot. And Shavuot was about the first fruits of the harvest. And it was remembering when they first harvested the wheat, they would spend a 48-hour or 2-day celebration, and they would be thanking God for the harvest, the fact that he'd been faithful to his promise, that there would be a seed time and harvest as long as the earth endured. But they'd also remember the giving of the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai, which hopefully will link into our theme of assembly this week. Because it's not just thinking about what we plant in the ground, it also is thinking about how we live our lives. Now, the liturgical calendar, the word liturgical or the liturgical year, is just about church stuff and celebrations within the church calendar. And Lammas, or as it would be called Loaf Mass, was a thanksgiving that Christians had, particularly in the Roman Church or the Catholic Church in the UK for many years. This thanksgiving for the first fruits of the harvest. Those that harvested it would grind it down and they would bake loaves, and they would give these loaves to the local church. We have a picture of St Mary's just down the road from you, and the vicar would take that and they would use that in communion to celebrate and give thanks, remembering that God had been faithful. So very similar to the Jewish festival, but now called Harvest. When Henry VIII came along and did away with what was known as the Church of Rome and instituted what we now know as the Church of England, it sort of went into decline. And it wasn't until, believe it or not, a Cornwall vicar in a C of E church in 1843, which if you're good at maths, it's 177 years ago, began to institute the festival that we now know as Harvest. And I'm sure many of you in your primary schools would have brought in, whether it was a can of beans or whether it was a fresh carrot from your allotment, you would have brought in these things to primary schools, particularly get involved in that kind of thing. And you would be aware of these kind of pictures of harvest. And this is what the guy in Cornwall instituted, and for the last 177 years, the churches up and down the land have celebrated Harvest Festival at this time of year. Whether it's like this or like this, it's about bringing the produce in and giving thanks for the food that we enjoy. But as I said before, this idea of Shavuot wasn't just thinking about what we planted in the ground, but it was thinking about life. So if we look in Galatians 6, it's the New Testament, it says this, Galatians 6 verse 7, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that shall he reap." Now, this idea of sowing and reaping, whilst we know very easily and can see it happening in our fields around us, even in the year 2019, 2020, how does that equate to our lives? And hopefully over the next few minutes we'll begin to look at that, not only what we plant and gather, but what we live and what we gather from that. So reaping and sowing, I think, has 3 principles. The first one is this: you reap what you sow. In other words, if you don't plant it, you are not going to be able to reap it. Now that's pretty interesting, isn't it? Now it sparks in my life a story. In the year 2000, a friend of mine, or a friend of a friend, gathered some acorns. And I'm sure you're aware of what an acorn looks like. You can see it on the screen. In 2000, this person picked some acorns and they planted them. And a year later, A friend of mine was given one. This is roughly what it looked like. It's not the actual picture of it, but this is what it looked like. So about 2001, a friend of mine who didn't have a garden of such, or a very small garden, said, "Jerry, would you like this oak tree? My friend planted it. It's a 2000, it's an acorn from the year 2000. Would you like it?" So I said, "Yeah, great. I've got quite a big garden," or I had then. And so I took it home. And here we are. We fast forward to 2003, 2004. It would have been slightly bigger than this, but this is the only picture I could find. I planted it in my garden, in the grass area. Now, I'm not a great gardener, and I'd let the grass grow a bit long. So I got my lawnmower out, and sadly I wasn't paying 100% attention. So as I was mowing the grass, I'd forgotten about the little oak tree, and sadly mowed over it. So in 2003, 2004, it was cut down to about 4 inches high. To be honest, I thought it might die. However, fast forward 16 years, and whilst I don't live in that house anymore, I do know the people that live there. And this is a picture taken today, just before I videoed this, of the oak tree now. 16 years on from when I cut it down, having grown for its first 4 years. Here it is. It's about 12 feet high. It's about that round in circumference, and the people that live there have got a little boy who's about 5, 6 years old, and he can climb, so his dad tells me, I haven't seen him do it, to the top. So it's just a very practical and evidential thing that I can look at in my life, this idea of planting something and then seeing the benefits of it later. And this is the oak tree in the house that I used to live in. Second principle of reaping and sowing, or sowing and reaping, is you reap more than you sow. What can that really mean? Well, as we just discussed, I had one acorn, I planted it, and I now have one 20-year-old or 16-year-old oak tree. So what does it mean about reaping more? I suppose I've got a lot more than the acorn, but if we look at the principle of corn on the cob, I'm sure many of you have tried it, and many of you, like me, enjoy it. It's great on a barbecue with butter laced over it. But if you take one of the corn kernels and plant it, apparently that corn kernel then grows into a corn on the cob. It has two branches. On each of the branches it has 2 corns, apparently, or the things that you see in this screen behind me. And on each of those corn on the cob there's approximately 700 kernels. So if you think about the kernels, there's 4 corns on one planted kernel, and each of them have roughly about 700 kernels. So your one corn seed or corn kernel develops into 2,800 sweet corn kernels. So that's about multiplication. So you multiply. If we think about sowing in the principle beyond just corn on the cob, what might we be able to sow in our lives? What kind of things could we use to illustrate of this idea of what we sow we reap in the way that we live? Well, I've got actually 6 examples, but we're going to look at the first 4. First 4 are these. The first one I would suggest is this idea of acceptance. Accepting people for who they are and how they are. Learning to live with each other. So I think acceptance, if we sow acceptance towards each other, we can begin to reap acceptance, and communities will become better places to live. Secondly, kindness. Do you know what? It's so easy, I find it so easy to be unkind sometimes. I'm shocked at myself at how unkind I can be sometimes. It's often when I haven't really thought about what I'm saying, and it's often not deliberately said. But actually being kind to one another. How much would the world be better if we sowed kindness each day and chose to sow kindness? The third one is about tolerance. We live in a world where we like to have our own say, and we live where we can have freedom of speech. But do we live with tolerance? Can we tolerate somebody who might not think as we think, that might have a completely different faith, or no faith at all? How can we begin to tolerate other people with different opinions, different lifestyle, different faiths, different understandings of how to do things? Can we become a more tolerant society? Can we sow tolerance by choice? And then the fourth one, I think is really important at this time of COVID-19, and that's encouragement. It's very easy to discourage people or to knock people down. But what we need at this time is the encouragement of each other. We need to spur each other on, whether it's, as I saw on the news only this week, following the rules, the rule of 6, and how my behaviour affects other people, and the encouragement of us all to live by the rules so that we will reap a benefit of less cases and more freedoms. So we reap more than we sow. And the third principle is you reap later. In other words, there's a period between sowing and actually reaping. Sometimes we have to wait. Now that's illustrated as we think about some bulbs. If you plant a bulb, I went to a church and did a talk as we looked at bulbs, and I gave people bulbs to take home. And if they planted them, it could have been 3, 4 or 5 months later when they actually saw the evidence of the planting of that bulb. And in one sense, what they would have seen is these beautiful flowers that came up, but it would have taken months before they actually poked through the surface and actually they saw the beauty of the flower. We're going to watch a clip from a film called The Lorex. It was written by Dr. Seuss, and in essence it's a guy called 12-year-old guy called Ted Wiggins, and he lives in Theedville that doesn't have any plants or trees at all, and there's a guy called Mr. O'Hare who even sells air. And I want you to watch the clip and think particularly, we're going to watch a song, think particularly about the words of the song and who's singing it. Enjoy the clip and we'll think about it afterwards.
I am Ted Wiggins, and I speak for the trees. And the fact is, things aren't perfect here in Thneedville. And they're only gonna get worse unless we do something about it. Unless we change our ways. And we can start by planting this.
Okay, come on now, everything's fine, right? I say we tell this kid what we think about that seed! People, come on! You, get out there right now and get these people on my side, or else you're fired! Go on, tell them what you think!
You don't know me, but my name's Cy. I'm just the O'Hare delivery guy. But it seems like trees might be worth a try. So I say, let it grow.
My name is Dan,
and my name's Rose.
our son Wesley kinda glows. And that's not good, so we suppose we should let it grow.
Let it grow, let it grow. You can't reap what you don't sow. Plant a seed inside the earth, just one way to know its worth. Let's celebrate the world's rebirth. We say let it grow.
My name's Mary, and I am 3. I would really like to see a tree. La 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 lee. I say let it grow.
I'm Grammy Norma, I'm old and I've got gray hair. But I remember when trees were everywhere and no one had to pay for air. So I say, let it grow!
Let it grow, let it grow, like it did so long ago. It's just one tiny seed, but it's all we really need. It's time to change the life we lead, time to let it grow.
I hope you enjoyed the clip. I wonder what you really, what you thought of the words. The words that stuck out to me is this. The guy that sings this in the song. It's just one tiny seed, but it's all that we really need. It's time to change the life we lead, time to let it grow. Verse in the Bible as we come into land. Galatians 6 verse 9 says this, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Now, the farmers will be sowing the fields ready for Harvest 2021. Our challenge to you is, as we think about the 4 things we've already looked at, and I'm going to add the last two is hope and love. And I think those four things of tolerance, acceptance, kindness and encouragement, if enveloped or covered over with love, gives us a sense of hope. So the challenge for you as we come into land that I want to leave you with is this. What is it in your life you're going to begin to sow? Because if you don't sow things like tolerance, acceptance, kindness, encouragement, and spread that over with big lashings of love and hope, then ultimately, where will life be? So the challenge for you yourself is this. What will you begin to sow now in order that we can reap a harvest later? Thanks very much for listening. Have a great week, and we hope to see you again soon.